morning, convening our October 21st, 2021 hearing of the House Investigative Committee to investigate compliance with audit numbers 19-12 and 21-01. Members, on our agenda first is some procedural matters that I would like to take care of first to set up our scheduling of witnesses and the issuance of further subpoenas and subpoena ducis tecum moving forward. But we do have Mr. Keith Chun here to testify, so I hope to get to that promptly. Members, I want to acknowledge, and for the members of the public, I want to acknowledge that all members are here present for the taking of this hearing. We do have staff members and other witnesses who have taken advantage present also by Zoom. Otherwise, we also have staff inside our public hearing room here in conference room 325 at the State Capitol. So good morning, members. First up, scheduling of appearances of witnesses before the committee. As I stated previously, members, next week, Thursday, October 28th, will be our next set of hearings. We will start at 9 a.m. for the morning hearings and 1 p.m. for the afternoon hearings, 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. members. Moving forward into the month of November, members, because of the number of documents we've received, as well as our intention and plan to continue to speak with people important to the audit, we will be taking a break from November 1st through around November 10th in order to be able to continue to go through the documents we receive, as well as interview other important folks. In particular, members, a set of people we have not yet really spoken with are the board members of both ADC and the Board of Land and Natural Resources. I'd like members for you to hold November 11th, potentially, as well as November 17th and 18th, all day for either meetings or hearings. We are also working with challenging travel schedules. So that will be another reason for our hiatus from hearings, public hearings and public meetings between November 1st through November 10th. Members, any questions or discussions about the scheduling matters at this time?
Sure. Just, we have a Act 90 working group meeting on the 17th from 1 till 4 p.m.
Okay, thank you. And again, members, I do understand that travel is something that we're challenged with. So for the purposes of this committee, we will allow, I'm still allowing members to participate via Zoom, if they are traveling or for medical reasons. Vice Chair? November 11th, November 17th, and 18th. Oh, no, that is not okay. Okay, members, please save November 12th then for that purpose. And I will try not to schedule anything because again, I know travel schedules are challenging, but I just want to leave that open for if we need to have a meeting. Members, our hearing notices, our rules require 7 days notice. And so that's some of the reasons why we need to do this. If I might ask also then, looking at that, could you also hold November 9th in the morning for a possible meeting? Again, this is to allow us to provide proper notice.
What was the dates again? Can you repeat it?
Sure. November 9th for a possible meeting in the morning. November 12th, November 17th, and 18th. For the 12th, 17th, and 18th, if you can hold all day, because it's really going to be some of our last opportunities due to our drafting schedule, as well as the deadline working backwards from submitting a report to the House of Representatives on opening day. We are looking at a tight timeline between mid-November through January. Members, I do reserve the right to also identify further meetings in November and December, but I would try to stay away from the holidays because I know that those are precious times for our families. Okay, members, so on that note, we'll move to agenda item number 2 for the issuance of subpoenas for October 28th. Members, as I explained from the outset of this committee in all of our discussions, this committee is going to follow the evidence where the evidence leads us. And I have said that repeatedly. As I stated yesterday, we have been made aware of omissions in the audits 19-12 and 21-01 that may be part of a larger pattern by the auditor to unilaterally decide not to report on certain substantive and critical issues discovered in the field, including in some cases, criminal and potentially criminal acts. Members, some members of this committee have been informed by interested persons about serious matters of omission in an additional audit. And this information has been brought to the attention of both some committee members as well as this committee now. And this committee will not sit on that information. We will follow the evidence where the evidence leads us. So on that note, members, my recommendation is to subpoena Mr. Randall Lee, a former contractor of the Office of the Auditor, to testify before this committee on Thursday, October 28th at 9:00 a.m. Members, any discussion or questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So, thank you, Chair. So, obviously, there's been questions raised as to whether the House resolution that really was a result of creating this committee that asked us to look into the audit results related to the audits of these two agencies. Questions have been raised as to whether investigating the auditor's action is within the scope of that resolution. So it seems to me if we could get the Attorney General to weigh in on this to support your position that the auditor's office is within the scope of what was called for in the House resolution that justified this committee, then you can put that to bed. So I wonder if we could hear from the Attorney General as to their opinion on whether the House resolution justifies what we're doing here with respect to the audit before we go any further on this.
Okay.
It would seem to make sense to me.
Your request is noted. Representative Kobayashi, members, any further discussion on this issue? Members, my recommendation is, and thank you, Representative Kobayashi, but my recommendation is not to do that. We are a legislative committee, and an inherent power and fundamental right of this body is to investigate. And so in our House resolution, it's to follow up on the audits and any other matters. So the position of this committee, of this chair at this point in time, is that when evidence has been brought to this committee of significance, that this committee will not be bottling it up if it relates to this question of a larger pattern by the auditor to unilaterally decide not to report on certain substantive and critical issues discovered in the field, including in some cases criminally and potentially criminal acts.
So,
so I'm sorry, let me recognize Rep. Perruso. Rep. Perruso, go ahead.
So I appreciate your position, and I think that is a really important function of oversight committees. And I support that inclination. I am concerned about time, and I am concerned about a continuing avalanche of documents for which we will be held responsible. And so I am wondering if it's possible to note those additional concerns, for further investigation beyond the parameters of this particular committee, but to be investigated by, for example, our government reform committee or some other body, or maybe this committee in the next interim. I'm just thinking about our calendar and the work before us.
Let me address that concern, members. I will say that when we bring Mr. Lee before this committee, that I don't anticipate further avalanche of documents, and I'm very worried about that. I believe in the conduct of this committee between the months of November and December and the dates we have set out, that this committee is working extremely well and diligently, and we will be able to tackle the issues before this committee that have come before this committee. So again, my recommendation is going to be to issue the subpoena. There is also a time element related to some of the evidence coming before us that our staff is taking a look at. And so the delay, the further delay is not something that I would recommend by this committee. Chair Tarnas.
Thank you, Chair. I would support your recommendation only because I actually didn't know much about what the role of oversight committees are. So I attended an oversight committee workshop at the Council of State Governments West recent meeting. And I asked that specific question, what if through our work as an oversight committee that in evaluating, follow-up of audits, we have questions about the audit itself. Is it incumbent on the oversight committee to pursue those questions regarding the audit itself? And they said, absolutely, yes, that is part of the responsibility of an oversight committee, as precedent in every other state that this panel represented. So it was something that was an affirmation for me that was a responsibility. And so I would support your request.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Before I return to Representative Kobayashi, any other comments or questions on this important discussion? Okay, Representative Kobayashi, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the issues is one of priority. So you make an argument for the correctness of what we're doing, which I still believe, if you're so confident about your position on this, why not back it up with the Attorney General? And that's all I'm saying is that the Attorney General can come out with an opinion, if that is correct, supporting the right to do this relative to what was specified in the resolution, which seems clear to me to just point at investigating the shortcomings of the two agencies that were brought up in the audit report. So, and that, when you look at the time we spent in our hearings, that the problems brought out with SLDF and ADC are basically falling by the wayside while we focus on the auditor. So, and not only am I concerned about the legality or correctness of us going outside of what I see as the scope of this investigative committee is set forth by the resolution, but we also, that's also costing us in terms of getting down to the details of what I thought we were here for, to investigate those two agencies and the recommendations and findings from the audit reports on those. And if you look at the time we were spending on those issues directly relative to issues related to the auditor, it's not even close. I mean, we're spending so much more time related to the auditor, and like you say, we do have limited time. And looking at one thing precludes us from really spending adequate amount of time looking at some of the findings on ADC and SLDF, which is the whole reason I'm here in the first place.
I believe, thank you, Representative Kobayashi, for those comments. I believe that we are spending sufficient time on the matters, but this critical information has been brought to the attention of this committee and to members of this committee. And I do not want this information bottled up and swept under the rug at the expense of the integrity of this committee and the House of Representatives. So in addition to address the comments of priority, today's hearing with Mr. Chun, we have a whole 4 hours if we need it devoted to exploring the issues of SLDF. With respect to ADC, we will be delving into issues this afternoon that correspond and parallel some of the issues that were raised in the ADC audit with respect to potentially the Galbraith lens. The problems are similar. And so with our aggressive schedule for November, in addition to hearings that we have not yet set forth in December, this committee, I believe, is staffed and equipped well with chairs of the subject matter committees, veteran legislators, both House and majority and minority leadership represented on this committee, and that we have the ability, and not just the ability, but the duty and obligation to follow through on this investigation. So members, there's been a lot of discussion. Are we ready to take the vote? Okay. Vice Chair, the vote is to issue a subpoena for the appearance of Mr. Randall Lee, a former contractor with the Office of the Auditor, for Thursday, October 28th at 9:00 a.m. Vice Chair for the vote.
Chair's recommendation is to issue subpoena as noted. Chair, Vice Chair vote aye. Rep. Hashem? Aye. Rep. Kobayashi?
No.
Rep. Perruso?
With reservation.
Rep. Tarnas?
Aye.
Rep. Yamashita?
Aye.
Rep. Okimoto? Chair, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, members. Thank you, members. All right, second subpoena, members, is for subpoena ducis tecum for Mr. Randall Lee to include provision of the documents to this committee by Wednesday, October 27th. 9 a.m. We will be issuing both of these subpoenas to Mr. Randall Lee through email. And I believe he is ready to also perhaps provide those documents to us. The documents that we will be requesting from Mr. Randall Lee will be the contract and any amendments to the contract that was executed by yourself and or your business with the Office of the Auditor. Any and all records, documents, communications, and or emails regarding the execution and or termination of your contract with the Office of the Auditor. And any other records, documents, communication, and or emails relevant to the purpose of the investigative committee's inquiry into whether the auditor and or the Office of the Auditor omitted in its audit process findings or recommendations of any detections of non-compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, or grant agreements that were potentially significant within the context of the work for which you were contracted by the Office of the Auditor. Members, those are very specific requests to Mr. Randall Lee. Any comments or discussions? Seeing none, Vice Chair for the vote. Representative Perruso.
May I ask what this contract was affected for? So which audit were they subcontracted?
Certainly, this was for the rail audit.
Thank you.
Members ready for the vote? Vice Chair for the vote.
Chair's recommendation is to issue subpoena ducis tecum as noted. In the presence of all members, any reservations? Reservations for Rep. Okimoto? Minos?
No.
Kobayashi? All others vote yes. Chair, the recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, Vice Chair. The third subpoena, members, for 1:00 p.m. on Thursday, October 28th, is in part thank you to Mr. Representative Kobayashi's questions and focus on the Yellow Book. As we have seen from the testimony provided, the Yellow Book standards and guidelines guide the performance audits of the Office of the Auditor's work. To provide us guidance on what this framework and set of standards means for auditing work in the state of Hawaii, I am subpoenaing and recommending the subpoena of Edwin S.W. Young, former auditor with the City and County of Honolulu, to appear before this committee to answer questions related to the Yellow Book standards and the application of these standards to the audits under investigation by this committee. Members, any questions or discussion?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Representative Kobayashi.
So wasn't Auditor Young a member of the task force put together by Speaker Saiki to look into wrongdoing by the auditor? This was several months ago. You know what committee I'm talking about, the 50-page report. Wasn't he on that committee?
You are correct, Representative Kobayashi. Mr. Young was appointed to the committee by Speaker Scott Saiki.
Yeah, you know, right? So he was on this committee to go after the auditor, and now you're going to bring him in to provide expert testimony on the Yellow Book, which, by the way, you thanked me for bringing out things in yesterday's hearing on the Yellow Book. What I brought up was that we've been holding that thing out like some Bible of laws, of which any transgression to is some serious offense deserving repercussion. When I'm the only one here who's been an auditor, and this, if you even expert witness on that, I can tell you exactly what the Yellow Book is. And I've told you before that auditing is a flexible profession where every audit is different. And I asked Mr. Shigi yesterday just to confirm, because he was here as more or less an expert witness on this, and he confirmed this since my word is not good enough, that these are standards, not laws, to guide you on audits. It's not some book of unbreakable, unshakable laws, which is not the way our profession is. So I believe you're going to get Mr. Young in here, and he's not going to be the right person because he's already been on this committee to investigate the auditor. So if you need an impartial expert witness, this town is full of auditors, CPAs. I'll find you somebody that can come in from the private sector or from the government sector and give an impartial expert testimony on the Yellow Book, who was not on the investigative committee for the auditor months ago.
Thank you, Representative Kobayashi, for your suggestions. I will be open to identifying any further auditors in this community who have the ability and breadth of experience as Mr. Young, who has experience in government auditing standards, and in particular, performance audits, not just financial audits, which there is a difference of within the Yellow Book standards. I also acknowledge Representative Kobayashi that the Yellow Book is not the Bible. It is a set of standards and guidelines, and that's what we will be inquiring into when we have Mr. Young before the committee. In addition, there will be other opportunities to bring back other, if this committee finds that Mr. Ranshi Igi was credible, to bring him back. And then of course, Mr. Kondo, if he continues to participate in these proceedings as his right to, will also be able to speak to those standards.
What about the issue of him, the conflict of him having been on the auditor investigation committee prior to this?
So to correct the record, Representative Kobayashi, that committee is separate from this committee. And I will examine your concerns about conflicts of interest, and I am certain that members of this committee will also question Mr. Young, and so that we can probe that conflict of interest if it becomes pertinent and relevant to our determinations. Okay. Any other further discussion with respect to anything that Representative Kobayashi has said? Representative Perruso.
I also share a concern just about the appearance of a conflict of interest. And I think in particular for this committee, it's really important for public confidence that it be really clear that our work is focused on good governance. And so I hear Representative Kobayashi's concern and I share it. So if there is a way to have to replace Mr. Young, because I think that he may be a tainted participant in this process, with someone else who does not have that background, that I would support that.
Okay. Thank you again for your comments. And again, this will be a week away, members. So I will certainly take any recommendations. But again, this committee can also probe the conflicts of interest that exist. And to question Mr. Young with respect to the Yellow Book standards, which may not have been necessarily, and again, I would urge members of this committee to look at this working group report, that we can actually probe areas that were not probed in the working group report that was presented to the State House. Okay. Members, we've gone on for this discussion for a while. We'll take a short recess at the request of the minority leader, and then we'll come back and have further discussions and then wrap up the vote on the subpoena. Okay, recess. Just 2-3 minutes. Representative Ichiyama for the
Judge recommendation is to issue the subpoena as noted presence of all members. Any reservations? For Rep. Okimoto, any no's? Seeing none. Oh, no for
No reservation.
reservations for Rep. Perruso. Any no's? Seeing
No,
Kobayashi is no. Any other no's or reservations? The recommendation is adopted.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Okay, members, that takes care of our procedural matters for this committee. And now we are here for the testimony of Mr. Ki Chun, former State Land Planning and Development Manager for the Land Division, Department of Land and Natural Resources, to provide testimony on the management, oversight, and disposition of public lands by the Department of Land and Natural Resources Land Division. Mr. Chun, thank you for your patience and for attending this hearing. As we have stated and is in the rules provided to you and copies of the rules, this is a Chapter 21 hearing, so you are afforded certain rights. Your testimony is going to be taken under oath. And so at this time, I'd like to administer the oath. If you could please stand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Chun. And for the record, Mr. Chun stated in the affirmative. So members, Mr. Chun has been a wealth of resource and information to both the audit and to the understanding and the further understanding of this committee's understanding of the SLDF audit. So I'd like to jump right into questions unless Mr. Chun, would you like to start with an opening statement that we afford to all members, to all people before the committee?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, go ahead.
I'm not sure, I haven't met all the members, I met some of you, but I do think one of the important things within these type of hearings is the credibility of the witnesses. So if I can give you a little brief background, and I also, somebody called me yesterday and told me that I better watch the hearing because Representative Ichiyama mentioned my name. So I did peruse it a little, and there were some issues that I thought if I could take after I, initially just to address some of the comments that I heard yesterday, in particular from Rep. Ichiyama and Rep. Perruso. So just real quick, and again, if the committee doesn't find my background and testimony credible, that's your prerogative, and I totally understand it, and I understand that if anything I say needs to be questioned, I welcome it, by members of the committee or outside. I would ask that if anybody does question the accuracy of my statements, that I've given the chance to rebut it, though, and which is why I've tried to provide as much documentation as possible. So it's not a he said, she said, So in short, let's see, I was with DLNR for 15 years between 2001 and 2016. Prior to that, I spent time in finance as an analyst, credit analyst at First Hawaiian Bank, as a corporate financial analyst in Los Angeles for American Honda's finance company, and then practiced corporate and real estate law and private practice. After being let go by DLNR, I went back to private practice. So I spent time, at Aqua Aston Hotels as in-house counsel. So that was a lot of hotel management, but also real estate acquisitions, including resort properties in Florida and a startup in Costa Rica. Then I went back into apologies to Aqua Aston, but I went back into real private practice, focusing on real estate development, representing developers in acquisitions. We took, some of the projects involved land use entitlements from federal, state, county levels. Subdivisions, including post-construction items like dedication of the roads and infrastructure, which I understand was one of the questions raised by the committee members before. Sales, marketing, we had, the developer had in-house brokerage and sales offices. So, working with them on marketing, the brokers and the salesperson stuff, I think that gives a lot of insight into some of the issues that, again, were raised in the audit about DLNR's lack of a marketing plan. So I think, there's enough 40 plus years of experience in both private and public sector that I believe the recommendations I made over the years, I think they're on solid ground. So that's just in a nutshell. Now, I'd like to apologize. I have a cough drop in my mouth because I have this lingering, I'm okay. No, I'm okay with water. But rest assured, I'm vaccinated and I had negative COVID tests, but I apologize for the cough drop. A couple of things though, in watching some of yesterday's things, and this is a point I raised with you before, Chair Belatti, is that I think it's important, even though everybody testifies under oath, unless the witnesses' statements are not subject to questioning, you can really say anything, and I think it's a little misleading to think that just because it's under oath, every statement is going to be accurate and truthful. It may be unintentional, but some of them have fairly large ramifications. Now, they can range from something I think is not substantive, but I did hear Ron Shiige say that I applied for a job at the auditor's office and I was not extended an offer. And that's just not true. I don't think you'll see any job application there. I got a call from Les Kondo, who I've known since law school, asking me if I'd be interested to come and work there. That's the extent of it. And I told him I had some conditions. And one of my conditions is I was only willing to work a 3-day work week, which I had been doing, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And he said he thought he could let me work 4 days a week. I told him I didn't want to add that extra day. But that was the extent of it. So, I think it's misleading for Mr. Shiige to say I applied and I was not extended a job offer. So I wanted to just, point that out for the record. Again, I don't think it's a substantive thing. I don't know if it was obviously not malicious or anything, but it was inaccurate. Now, you go to the other extreme of this, though, and I believe Representative Perruso had asked Chairperson Case about ceded land revenues. And, I think everyone is in agreement that ceded land revenues, 20% is set aside for OHA. I don't think there's any dispute, but if I understand correctly, your question was, what happens to the other 80%? Now, I previously provided the excerpts from the Admissions Act. And, Section 5B of the Admissions Act is what defines ceded lands. And that's the bulk of DLNR's inventory. I would suspect 90%, if not even higher. Now, under Section 5F, ceded land and ceded land revenues are to be used for specific purposes, and those are enumerated in the Admissions Act: the betterment of Native Hawaiians, public education, housing, etc. And I believe that is done through the vehicle of the ceded land revenues going into the state's general fund. Now, under HRS 17119, which is the statute that created the SLDF, or the Special Land and Development Fund, it indicates what revenues can go into the fund, as well as what expenditures are authorized from the fund. And I sent you, and I apologize for the last minute thing, but I sent you just the excerpt of that statute. And you can see that the purposes in that statute are very different from what's enumerated in the Admissions Act. Also, it talks about what revenues go into that special fund. And the key part that I see seems to be left out of many documents or explanations from DLNR is what goes into that special fund is subject to Section 5F of the Admissions Act. To me, that means Section 5F governs, and everything else falls within, what have you, including enumerating revenues from industrial parks will go into that special fund. Now, and that is why revenues from the Sand Island Business Association lease goes into the special land fund. When I first started, prior administrators told me to look at developing non-ceded lands and industrial parks, because then the money will go into the special land fund and it can be used by the land division. So I find it, I believe Chair Case's reply was that after we pay OHA, the remainder goes into the special land fund. I just think that is not correct. And, if the whole genesis of this committee is to look into the special land and development fund, I find it very surprising that the chairperson of the department doesn't know where the funds should go. I mean,
I think that she was saying not where they should go, but where they do go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she says they do go into the special land fund and it funds all their operations. I don't think that's accurate. And I think factually, funds have gone to the general fund. But what I did provide you today also this morning was land board approvals in which the land division requested the land board authorize transfers of lease revenues from various industrial commercial resort leases into the special land fund. So again, that's inconsistent with Chairperson Case's statement that it all goes into the thing if they have to ask the land board for approval. Now, aside from whether that meets legal muster of whether ceded lands can go into the special land fund, the land board also approved or authorized the department to transfer any lease revenues from industrial commercial resort leases into its special land fund rather than turning it over to the general fund. And this authorization, which is in the submittal I sent, is without any further action from the land board. Now, I think as a policy, I would kind of wonder whether the land division can just unilaterally or in consultation with the chairperson transfer money that should be going to the general fund for all of those purposes enumerated in the Admissions Act into their special fund unilaterally. I think, I'm not sure it passes even legal muster, but if it does, policy-wise, this is funds that the legislature should be using for those purposes: education, housing, betterment of conditions for Native Hawaiians. So that, I think was an inaccurate statement. And, again, people make inaccurate statements, not intentionally or not, but we're talking about the special land development. It's the whole purpose of this. And you're talking about the chairperson of the department making that kind of statement, which I don't think is correct. And again, I welcome anybody that doesn't believe what I'm saying is accurate to correct me. But I found that to be a little surprising, which highlights the point I had made earlier, Chair, is that, responses from any witnesses, whether it be Della or myself, should be subject to cross-examination and rebuttal. Otherwise, whoever speaks can, I don't think if I brought this up, maybe you would have just accepted that 80% of ceded land revenues go to the special land fund. So that's also one of the reasons I tried to provide as much documentation as I can, memos, etc. Because absent that, I have seen in the past that the responses from land division will be, nobody told me that. I wasn't aware of it. And then it's just accepted as fact. But I tried to provide you with a small sample of correspondence, whether memos or emails, that show they should know it's addressed to them. So that's just to address, some of the issues raised yesterday, but also the larger issue of looking to the credibility of the witness and the statements and make sure they're subject to scrutiny, either by the committee members or by anybody else testifying.
Thank you, Mr. Chun, for that opening statement. So just a comment on the documentation. We really appreciate the fact that you have provided us additional documentation. And so as we discussed prior to the start of this hearing, what I'm going to do is, with all of the documents that you have provided us, and not for you to do it, but what our staff will do is we will bait stamp it, Chun _ and give it a number, and then it will be accepted into testimony. I'm also going to be asking and doing an eyeball check as well to see if it corresponds with the documents that were provided by DLNR, because I do believe that there is quite a bit of overlap. And so we will have a full body of information before us.
And on that note, which I mentioned before, I'm sure there's a lot of overlap because these are public documents. But I do suspect that many of the internal emails and memos that, I believe you probably requested in your subpoena to check them, you may not be getting those from that division. And so, I think similar to the auditor, they only can work with what they requested. They don't know what they don't have. So if they ask for all memos and stuff like that, I would suspect that if DLNR didn't provide it to you folks, they didn't provide it to the auditor either.
Okay, and then this is this opportunity to be able to really delve into that, because I do think your comments, Mr. Chun, about testing the credibility of witnesses. That is exactly precisely what this committee is doing by bringing different witnesses forward. And I appreciate the clarification that you provided. You, of course, know better the job offer that was offered to you and what happened. So that certainly clarifies the record for that purpose. Any other comments? And then what I'll do is I want to open it up to questions because I know members have questions. And we will be following the same order that we've done for the SLDF. So on that note, Chair Tarnas.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for being here, Mr. Chun. I'm interested in understanding, well, let me first start by saying, with your broad experience in land division and in these real estate matters, land management and leasing, were you able to interact with the audit team as they were coming up with their scope to be able to give them insights into what might be
And I noticed that was a question raised yesterday. So I went and looked in my files. And I don't know where it fell within their, process because I found that I replied to an email from Roy Kawamoto asking me questions. And I believe Roy was one of the names mentioned yesterday. So I think he reached out by email because I found my response to him, and that was in November 2018. I don't know where that falls within their parameter. And again, I am sketchy on the details, but I was able to find some of these documents. I know I met on this September 27th, 2018 with Roy Kawamoto, Ron Shiige, and Ryan Hurley. I think there may have been another meeting or so, but I wanted to be accurate and look to see if I could firm it, but I don't have those notes from those meetings. So I did meet with them and discuss, I answered questions they had. Again, I don't know how this work. So they just asked questions and I answered them.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's the information I found out there about what meetings I have. I gotta think there was at least another maybe. But I know, I think obviously in response to the meeting, Roy Kawamoto followed up by email with questions.
Great, thanks. If I may, another question.
Absolutely.
I wanted to understand about, you made a number of recommendations, I think, over the time that you were working in the land division. And I understand that some may have been adopted, others may not have been. I'd like to just talk briefly about one of them, and that is this whole issue about encouraging the land division to convert from managing ground leases to issuing and managing space leases. And I'm just trying to understand, when you were going through this analysis in your work, was there any sort of evaluation of specific properties that you thought would be very good for this sort of thing, and and the costs involved with that? What was sort of your analytical process you went through?
I think this requires a little more background, if you can indulge me. And I was hired to generate revenue from unutilized state lands. And at that time, what they considered it would be vacant lands that had income potential. So, we looked around. Again, one of the glaring issues that I noticed is they don't have a comprehensive inventory. So how do you determine which lands actually have income potential? They can provide you a list of all their state lands by TMK and maybe acreage. But all of the vital data that you need, whether it be land use commission designation, county zoning, SMA, assessed values, et cetera, those are the kind of things that would allow you to really delve into and sort through the data to find out what has potential. But due to the lack of it, it was really hit the ground and ask the agents on each island what they thought. Now, we did pursue some of those things. So we did do some rezoning successfully on the Big Island and on Oahu to try and rezone it from residential to industrial, et cetera.
Mr. Chun, I appreciate getting the background, but I don't want to, we only have limited time. Okay. So I do want to focus on the question if you could.
And the question became, after discussing it with one of one of the real estate professionals was that that takes a lot of time to get entitlements and militia. Then one of the suggestions was, why don't you look at acquiring occupied property? Because then you're going to get the revenue stream. So that is when you start to look at, what properties out there can we do land exchanges and maybe swap it for a commercial building, which is tenanted and it has an income stream right away. But then, you look at some statutory limitations on issuing space leases, et cetera. And you don't want to go acquire a building and have to go auction off each unit by a public auction. So you needed some vehicle. One would be a master lease in which you just master lease it to someone and they go find the sublessees. But I don't think you're going to get the profit margin in there. I believe DHHL was successful in getting legislation passed to allow them to do space leases. So that was one of the recommendations. But
so it was more in general about the policy. You wanted to enable DL and our land division to do this, but it wasn't really an analysis of a particular property that you had done.
No, but there was, I believe there was a property that we were in the process of acquiring on Pro City or something that was a building with tenants, and we figured, how do you do this with these tenants?
Right.
That wasn't one of the big sticking points that I as far as, some of the recommendations that were rejected. I think the bigger ones would be the revocable permits and, the long-range strategic plan.
Understood. Yeah. And I appreciate your foreshadowing some of these other things that you really want to talk about.
Yeah.
Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas. Minority Leader Okimoto, Representative Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. We have limited ability to ask you a number of questions, so I'll start like a 20,000 foot level. DLNR has certain legal requirements in how they manage state lands, and I think that gets a little confused because there's different levels of responsibility that they have. They tend to look at it very simplistically in terms of certain sections of the law as far as justifying why they manage state lands the way they do. As the attorney for DLNR, do you have an appreciation for the different levels of responsibility that they have as far as legal and public and otherwise that they may not be observing?
Well, first, I wasn't their attorney. I was just a planning, development manager. But I've heard the responses from Land Division or DLNR saying, our operations, we comply with law. And I believe what is intended with that is we comply with the provisions of Chapter 171 for a revised statute. But, the statute is pretty bare bones. It can't lay out everything that they need to do. But more importantly, I think the overall obligation imposed more than the statute is in the Constitution, the Admissions Act, and in HRS itself, which is that these lands are held in public trust for the benefit of the public or for the benefit of the class of beneficiaries you see in Section 5F of the Admissions Act. So regardless of whether you meet, and Rep. Tarnas will bring this up about the lease extensions, it's permissive. It gives them the discretion to extend leases, but doesn't mandate it. But just because a lessee puts in improvements that meet those guidelines, I think the overall obligation is to ensure the lease extension meets your fiduciary duty and falls within the best interest of the public trust and the trust beneficiaries. And I believe Chair Case mentioned that they go through a thorough analysis and it's a case-by-case basis, and I disagree. Every time I've seen it, there is not the type of analysis. I don't think they've looked at the quality of the improvements. It's easy to say that we don't want to take the property back because it costs so much to maintain it. But that sounds good on its face. But have you done an analysis of how much? Because some buildings may be in great condition, some may not. And for those not, maybe you don't want to take it back. But if I look at this and I see a tax assessed value of 800,000, I think I would look at it a lot closer. If I look at a building that is fully tenanted with subtenants, I think one of the comments was, well, we don't want to take it back because it's speculative. We don't know if anybody will bid. That depends on what the building is. And it also falls into the lack of a long-range strategic plan and a lack of a marketing plan. You can't expect to hold a land board meeting and say, well, nobody came and asked for the building, so there's no demand. I guarantee you, if you had a broker working your property, you'd find a lot more interest. What really real estate people to go and peruse that kind of stuff? But I think it goes hand in hand with the lack of a marketing plan.
And if I could ask one more follow-up question, who's responsible for managing the state lands at DLNR specifically? What would you say?
Ultimately, it's the chairperson, but she has so many divisions. So I understand that's a tough job, and a lot of divisions have conflicting missions. So the actual management falls in the land division, and that would be Russell Suji, Kevin Moore, and Ian Hirokawa. Administrators, assistant administrators, and what have you. So I think one of the questions is, what level of expertise do they possess to manage what is arguably the state's most valuable asset? It seems to be awfully reactive, and I don't think any action is normally taken unless there's some public disclosure of mismanagement. The Star Advertiser articles come out, the audit, and it's only then, will something happen. I think one of the memos I gave you was a 2016 memo in which I pointed out that the percentage rent for the Hawai'i Hotel is not being collected properly or in compliance with law, under HRS 17136. That was in 2016. I gotta say that having read that percentage rent provision, I think you would find a first-year associate drafting a better lease than that, But I believe that was under was drafted by or under the supervision of Kevin Moore, who's the assistant administrator. And it kind of shocks me that if you're in that position, that you would have leases so poorly written. But more importantly, you're not enforcing the percentage rent provisions. And my memo listed a whole bunch of things. You're trying to collect percentage rent in advance. So how are you going to collect percentage rent in advance when you don't even know what the revenues are? I know if you're sophisticated enough, many shopping centers may have these where they base it on your historical revenues and they'll true up at the end. But trust me, land division is not sophisticated enough to do that. And that the statute, this is the law now. The statute requires you, if you're collecting percentage rent based on the revenues of the lessee, so in this case, Hilo Hawaiian Hotel, if you're collecting percentage rent based on the revenues of the lessee, you also have to include the revenues of any sublessees. So that means, in addition to the revenues that the hotel makes, you have to include the revenues of the beauty shop, the liquor store, all of those concessions. I don't agree with it, but it's in the statute. And at one point I had made a recommendation to the voting guy, we need to amend the statute because it's applicable in certain cases. And I believe, a good example would be like a DFS at the airport because the state owns the implements and they're concessioning out little things. But nevertheless, I don't think it's appropriate for Hilo Hawaiian Hotel to have to pay that rent because they're not making the revenues that the salon and the liquor store is making. But it is in the law, And, when I drafted the non-law lease, you had to put that kind of stuff in, Similarly, there's no provisions in that lease for the state to go and audit the books or confirm the revenues. And I think the reporting period was like from the middle of a month to the middle of a month. Who does that? You want to tailor it to the lessee's financial reporting periods. So you can get their audited statements and, so now this is in 2016. And now we're at 2021. I heard testimony from Kevin Moore saying it's an oversight. We're going to go to the land board to fix it. And I'm saying, well, why is it taking 5 years and you still haven't gone there to fix it? Now, you can't say you don't know because the email is addressed to Russell and Kevin. But it begs a bigger question that, well, clearly there's no procedures in there in which to confirm percentage rents or verify it. Because if this is a glaring one that you're made aware of, how many other leases are out there that, this is one of the bigger revenue properties. So, you gotta kind of shake your head at a certain point.
Unbelievable. Thank you.
Representative Yamashita. Representative Hashem. Representative Perruso.
Yes, I have a question, or I wanted to respond. And I wanted to just clarify that your background is in planning, right? So especially in this area around land development and...
Well, it's real estate and business, and we represented clients that were doing real estate, either acquisition, sales, but also real estate developers.
Okay, so with the LNR, you're on the land development side.
Yeah.
Right? Okay,
but,
so...
Real quick, yes. But it also kind of morphed into tasking me with doing income production, so to generate more revenue. And that kind of shifted from the development side to realizing that mistakenly, the assumption I had made was that when you went in there, you had portfolios of leases and revocable permits that were all generating market rent. And when we delved into it, it wasn't. So that's one of the biggest, most immediate opportunities to increase the revenue stream, right? By bringing it up to market.
Right, and I really appreciate that contribution of yours to the conversation. I did want to back up a little bit to your earlier comments. And I think it's okay to mention this, but yesterday in our conversation with Director Case, she made the assertion about the remainder of the revenue from ceded lands going into the special fund. And that was in fact supported by the Deputy Attorney General's memo that we received last night. So it was a long and what I consider to be a rather convoluted argument supporting that practice, but that is indeed the practice. So the questions you raise about constitutionality and legality are my questions. And so I don't fault you for not, because you're not working on the allocation side. Right. You're working on the revenue generation side, right? So,
but if that is in fact true, that the 80% of, after OHA goes in, all goes into the special land fund, then why would you need this board submittal that I submitted you there to transfer money over to?
Well, for OHA, they use that.
No, they're just saying revenues from.
But they only do it for OHA.
I'm seeing that. I'm missing it there. Because are you telling me that the general fund does not get a cent of ceded land revenues?
For the lands that are controlled under SLDF, that is correct.
So
that is my understanding.
After you pay OHA, it's 20.
Correct.
The entire balance will go to the special land.
Correct. So that's not really like our topic of conversation today. But I did want to thank you for your contribution to that analysis of the way in which we've been doing our land development with the LNR. So.
Okay, Rep. Ichiyama.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, for being here today. I was wondering if you can share with us some of the work that you did on revocable permits while you were working at DLNR. And I understand that you had worked on a project with the boating division with their revocable permits. Maybe if you can give us some of that context.
Yeah, and so as a follow-up to starting with developing vacant and underutilized land, it's morphing into an income production thing. We realized that, in looking at the sources of revenue, that was an opportunity to really increase revenues immediately. The revocable permits back in, I believe, 2012, we started this exercise. And I think I gave you guys some spreadsheets of the revocable permits I know they were redacted, but we had to manually create this database because there wasn't anything available in that respect. And with that, we retained an appraiser to look through the revocable permits. And the preliminary indication was, almost all of them were below market rent. Some of them were in the range of 500 to 1,000% below market rent. And the reason for this is revocable permits are intended to be temporary, 1 year maximum. So you don't have, in the revocable permits, you don't have a mechanism to do a rent reopening every 10 years like you do in a lease, because they're not intended to last that long. But they end up sitting there on the books for 10, 20, some 30 years without any increases. And, even if you try and increase them marginally now, you're never going to catch them. But something needed to be done. So I conveyed this information to the administrators and was instructed to stop working on it and cancel the project. Now, I'm not sure. I believe it may have been because, as Kevin Moore relayed Russell's message, was that Russell wanted to make sure the appraiser would apply discounts to the rent. And I'm thinking, why do you need to instruct the appraisers to? If that's what the market is and the market justifies a discount for certain reasons, let that appraiser do it. But nevertheless, we were instructed to stop working on it. They canceled the appraisal contract. Or, again, this is wordsmithing. Russell said we let the contract lapse, but to me, that's tomato, and nothing was done. Now, this is the problem I have is that nobody's aware of the background. All you see is that they eventually went and did something with the revocable permits, but nobody has just been able to disclose that this was raised with you many years ago. Why did you stop it? At the same time, I was shuttled off over to the voting division and made the same proposal to the voting division. So we revamped the voting divisions one. And so we got an appraiser, we increased the rents. While the appraisal was being done, we implemented interim rent increases because it was going to take a while. We also use, as most people in the business know, that's your time to update your revocable permit form or lease to bring it into more current terms. These things have been on the books for 10, 20 somewhat years. And I told the administrator, you guys have oceanfront property. You really need to beef up your environmental provisions, your insurance provisions that are more applicable to properties, et cetera, et cetera. So they did that. We revamped it. We went to the board. I believe we went in 2016. Chair Case was there. Russell was there. They chose not to do that for land division. Now, I believe the only reason something happened was Rob Perez came up with that front page article on the revocable permits and it blasted them. And what happened was the governor had to form a revocable permit task force. And it's kind of ironic that I was asked by members of the task force to give them the forms we had used in voting, But I think it's misleading for the only thing to come out of this is now that we found out about this, we're going to address it. Nobody has been called to task to say, why was this ignored in 2013?
So just make sure I understand the timeline from what you're saying. In 2013, you raised the question to land division administrators that DLNR needs to look at its revocable permits, both the form of the permit as well as the amount of revenue or rent being
at that time, it was mostly the rent.
Mostly the rent.
But we had done the analysis too, and hired an appraiser.
In 2013?
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like it got shelved, put on the side.
Yeah.
And help me understand the rationale for that.
I don't know. That was one of the problems we had, is there's no explanation, it just said stop working on it. It's no different than, again, the long range asset management strategic plan they did in 2015 that we were told to stop working on. And now it's raised in the audit and now there's time to do it. But nobody explained why it wasn't. I was told it's not necessary. But Russell did not want to meet and Kevin Moore could not explain it. Russell said no. So, you're just left guessing, but you do what the boss says. But now it comes out like, hey, we're doing great. We did raise the rent for the permits. Now, the funny part of, well, it's not funny, but because we had done a detailed inventory back in 2012, 2013, of the revocable permits, the appraiser we hired didn't have to go and create that whole thing. So the entire appraisal assignment was under $100,000. Now, fast forward it to whenever they decided to go and actually reappraise the RPs in, I'm not sure, 2016, whenever. I think the appraisal contract was upward of $500,000. And the reason for that was they didn't have that type of inventories. So the appraiser hired had to go and start from scratch and create all of this kind of stuff. And obviously that adds to, your bill.
And just if I could wrap up on this train of thought, I think hypothetically speaking, if they had followed through with the appraisal and rent increases in 2013, the state would have realized that additional revenue much earlier than when they ultimately did it several years later.
There's time value to money, doing it back then. And I don't know what the rationale of not doing it was, because the voting division seemed to be fine with it.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I actually want to follow up on this because I'm trying to take notes furiously. You stated at one point you believe Kevin Moore said Russell wanted to apply discounts. So can you explain that? Because that does seem to be the answer to the question that Rep. Ichiyama asked, which is what was the rationale? So can you give us more information about this application of discounts?
One of the rationales, and again, there wasn't a lot of communication, but one of the rationales is that rent should be discounted because RPs, revocable permits, are short-term in nature. So what you would normally pay for land on a long-term basis should be less if it's a short-term basis. To me, that's the appraiser's job. It's not for us to tell them. All we're asking for is give us what the market rent is. And if the market dictates that short-term dispositions, warrant a drop in the rent, then that's what the appraiser would end up telling you. You don't have to tell them to apply discounts. And if you don't want to go forward with it because he won't, then there's something motivating that decision. Because by nature, you're already asking a very well-qualified appraiser to do his job.
Okay, so I hear that, so you're saying that we should leave it to the appraiser to determine the discounts.
Right.
Now, if any, and then in the event, I'm trying to find what is the policy solution here. So are you saying that the policy solution should be that in the determination of rent redeterminations, just leave it to the appraiser?
I think if I'm managing land as a fiduciary duty, and I think the trust deserves to earn market rent. And in this case, you will determine it via an appraisal. I've heard Russell say the statute doesn't require revocable permits to be done by appraisal, but just because it doesn't require it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. In the private sector, appraisals are done as more of a guideline. You're free to negotiate what you want off of it. But, I think you draft your scope of work to the appraiser and say, we have these dispositions and they're on month-to-month tenancy, give us what the market rent is. And if a month-to-month tenancy deserves a lower rent than a long-range tenancy, that will come out in the appraiser's work. You don't have to go tell them to discount.
Okay, yeah, yes, go ahead, Chair
So,
Hashem.
one thing that kind of perplexed me, but you kind of touched on the answer, is the rents, like you stated, the rents are considerably lower than market many times. But we're supposed to base on everything on an appraisal. So it's supposed to be public on the books. It's supposed to be public auction. It's supposed to be based on appraisal, and that's supposed to be the rate. So in theory, it's supposed to come out at market rate. So what is the lag between there? I mean, you kind of touched up on that, but can you go into more detail on why are we below?
For long-term leases, the rent or the upset when you put out to auction is based on an appraisal. But for the revocable permits, which are short-term, intended to be interim month-to-month dispositions, there's no requirement that it be done by appraisal. And I think Land Division has hung its hat on that, saying the statute doesn't require. Now, when this whole thing came up, that our initial analysis revealed, because we hired an appraiser, we didn't have to, but I think it was prudent to do it. You know, when the initial analysis came out with such substantially low rents, then I think it's prudent to follow up and use an appraisal to help us with that. Does that answer your question? Kinda, no?
Well, it was just like, why are we so low? Is really what's
okay. Well, I think
if we're supposed to be using appraisal, why are we so low?
I think in part, and historically, because they were month to month informal, they were very informal dispositions. For example, when you get a long-term lease, you'll have a surveyor survey the lot, and you know it'll be an attachment to your lease showing what you're leasing. I've seen revocable permits where it's just a map and somebody draws a red circle that says that's what you're getting, you know. And it's supposed to be very informal, and a lot of times the lands are not subdivided lots or what have you. But what happens is they're supposed to be on the books for no more than a year, and they get renewed every year, but nobody adjusts the rent. So after 10 years, you know, but initially, because it was so informal, they would have their land agents determine the rent. And you know, I hate to speak ill of some of the staff, but they were not equipped to do that. They're just coming up with their best guesstimate. So chances are it was not really reflective, you know, and I think that sometimes the attitude was, yeah, well, it's only going to be on the books for a year anyway. Next thing you know, 20 years later, you got that thing and nobody's adjusted it along the way, you know. And I think at a certain point, they did try and go in with do periodic adjustments, but it was more like for commercial leases, we'll adjust it by 3%, or you know, for ag lease, we'll adjust it by 1%. But nobody bothered to look at what are you increasing, because if it's so far below market, I don't care if you increase it by 50%, you're still below market, right?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to follow up with this because I don't want to leave this revocable permits yet, and then we'll move on back to Representative Tarnas. Did you have an opportunity to review the work of the revocable permits task force and then look at how they now reset up the procedures? Do you have any comment on that?
I think I was gone.
Okay, but I mean, since then, because I mean, that's the work that they have done since that might have adjusted and addressed any of your concerns.
I think they appraised it, and I think they tried to do some, if I understand correctly, they appraised it, but it was such a big jump that they couldn't implement the whole thing. So they, you know, they did only a portion, and I agree with that. You know, when you're 500 to 1,000% below, one of my recommendations back then was you can't just whap them with this, you know, but you got to phase it in by X, you know, every year, assuming you're renewing it. So I think they have done that. I just think, you know, if you're really looking after improving the efficiency and management of the division, you have to kind of look at the history of the people that are running it, and it's always been only after you get busted and called out in an audit or newspaper articles, because you were told of this before. So why? Yeah, I mean, again, you're gonna end up 5 years from now, something else is gonna come out. That's the only time they're gonna act. You know, it goes similar to the marketing plan, which I, you know, try to do something about, but it's upon the for lease signed sale on the property and publish one ad saying lease, you know, public auction. You know, what landowners do that? Yeah, I mean, everyone, you know, if it's good enough for Camel Estate to use a broker, don't you think, you know, I mean, and I've been told many times, and it's kind of a running joke that the most important piece of equipment is not your computer, it's your chair, because you do it and you sit there and wait for the phone to ring. You know, I mean, it's kind of a running joke, but you know, you need to actually go out and work it. If you're going to try to sell your house or anything, you want a broker that's going to go and work it, right? Not just put a for sale sign and sit back. You could do that, you know. And I've heard the excuses that we can't do it because of the procurement code and stuff like that. And I don't necessarily agree. Maybe after all is said and done, you'll definitely run into limitations. But I think what you're leaving on the table is definitely worth going out and having the discussions with the brokers, which I had set up. And we looked at various types of compensation schedules. I know I've heard the excuse, well, you know, you can't bid on a percentage and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know, you can RFP it. You don't have to put it out, you know, but you can also look at different ways to get us in a better position than we are now. May not be perfect, but you know, some of the things I had discussed with one of the firms is, well, can I pay you a flat fee for you to market some of it and at least bring people to the table? You know, they may not win at the auction or not, but at least we get our properties out there, you know, and know. Or can we do this? And I packaged some of it with properties that we thought maybe we can use your property management services, so you'll get a stream of income while you're trying to work the other stuff. I mean, there are limitations clearly, but you know, you can't just give up. I mean, I think, but you have to understand the mechanisms and how these brokerage arrangements work before you can start to discuss it with the brokers and maybe tweak them, you know, and part of it is having the open conversation, you know, but I don't think it's as simple as we can't do it because of procurement code, so we're going to stick with this pound the sign thing, you know.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for moving to the marketing plan, because that was my next area of questions. And just before I move on back to Chair Tarnas, I don't know that in your testimony and the documents you provided, was there documentation about the different models of brokerage arrangements?
I don't know if I provided. There was a memo. I don't know if it was provided or not. Okay. But again, you know, if all we're told is stop working on it, we don't need it. I mean, and they don't want to meet and discuss it, then how much more explaining do you really want to get into it? I mean, we went through an in-depth asset portfolio. I think you have a draft of it to present to brokers. I did a outline of a long-range strategic asset management plan, which incorporated the marketing stuff and was told stop working on it. We don't need it. You know, that was in 2015. Now you got a 2019 audit that says you don't have a long-range strategic plan. And I understand the answer now is we're going to hire a consultant. And I'm thinking, if you have 3 people running the division that can't come up with a strategic plan or at least an outline, that you have to hire a consultant, you know.
I sense your frustration, Mr. Chen. So just so that we don't lose, I don't want to lose track of this thread. If you did offer any kinds of brokerage models with which to the leadership, I would be interested in that. But you know, if you can't find it, I understand because this is a long time ago. But I will follow up on that in the.
Yeah, but you know, I did do something, but again, I think it's talking over their heads. But second, if they have no interest in it and told me we don't need it, then how much you want to go and grovel with this thing?
Well, you're talking to the legislative committee now, so that's the reason why we're asking the questions. Chair Tarnas, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Did you determine that there needed to be changes in the statute to enable them to use brokers?
I thought, based on my reading of the statute, there might be ways you could do it within the parameters of the existing solicitation types, you know, like an RFP. Brokers for a long time have been dying to represent the state on their portfolio, you know, because it's such a large holding. But I think it was definitely worth discussing it with them to see what kind of arrangements we could come up with within the parameters.
Okay, so that's what you were working on. You didn't propose any changes in the statute? Okay.
Not for the procurement.
When you were working with the Division of Boating and Ocean Recreation, did they follow up on your recommendations for using a broker?
Well, I gave the asset management plan, and I happened to run into one of their officers in the last month who specifically remembered it. But they don't have that much land. Yeah, their portfolio is pretty small. So, you know, waterfront property kind of sells itself. You know, it's a finite item. So the yacht clubs, etc., all of the reasonable stuff is pretty much taken, and there's demand for it. So you don't have to. I think the goal there was to make sure we're making market rent, which we did for the Waikiki.
Okay. Yeah. Chair, my other question has to do with rent discounts. So maybe if you want to continue on with others on marketing issues, I'm happy to come back to me later.
Sure. Members, I think I had questions about marketing, but I think Mr. Chen answered them. Any more questions on marketing as a subject matter? Any more questions?
On marketing in particular or just in general?
Marketing I have a question, but not really this particular topic. Okay. Marketing just generally? Do you want to ask your question?
I'm more comprehensive than that.
Okay. All right. So let's just go back to Rep. Okimoto. Any questions? Rep. Kobayashi, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the odd things about this whole situation is this being Honolulu. So I have long relationships with principals, primary principals in business, legal and real estate here in Honolulu. And long before I even became a legislator or became aware of some of the issues here, I've heard from these principals and everybody else in town about some of these issues just with incredulous tones that, you know, this is what's going on and it's unbelievable. And this is what I've heard. And I, having talked to people, what I had been aware of is that most of the principals know you and have also relayed, I think, concerns to you, I would guess. I mean, what I've heard from people have been pretty unanimous in that people who know what they're talking about in the private sector scratch their heads and go, what is going on over there? And you know a lot of the same people in the community here in legal, real estate, and business. Have you heard the same things that I have from them about their opinions on what's happening?
Yeah, you know, some of it was, come on, you know better. I go, this is not my decision, you know. But I think one of the most common theme that I've heard over the years is it's got to be incompetence or corruption. Now, I'm just relaying what I heard third party, but that's the whole thing. You know, look at, you're doing this. It's got to be incompetence or corruption. And then I got some follow-up comments going, it's got to be corruption because you can't be that incompetent. Now, I don't know. You know, I do believe they may be working to the best of their abilities, but that's what you got. Corruption, there's been suspicions, but I can't substantiate it, and I don't want to go there. You know, but that's what I've heard. And you know, one of the guys I know that's been a developer and developed industrial warehouses here and in Guam and et cetera. So, hey, I've been in this business 30 years. There's only two reasons a landlord will not collect fair market rent from the tenant. Number one is the tenant has some dirt on him. And number two is he's taking something under the table. He goes, I guarantee you that guy's up, he's taking money. I've been in this business 30 years. You know, I go, I don't know about that. You know, but I have to think that the state's most valuable asset, one of probably is this lands. Now, if your choice of the people to run that and manage those lands is incompetence or corruption, I think you gotta raise your standards. You know, I mean, there's gotta be a bigger pool of talent than that.
Right. Yeah, the people that run things here in Honolulu, there seems to be, what I hear is everybody seems to think there's some corruption there that you only be so stupid. So that, there must be something else going on. That seems to be
the other
what
option,
a lot of people are talking about. And it sounds like you're hearing the same thing.
Well, and then the other option after I left was try to get in on it and become a lessee and an RP tenant. I mean, why not reap the benefits? Yeah. And just buy minority interest in some of these leases and stuff and offer to finance their improvements. I'm not saying whether I did or not, but that's advice to some of the friends is, hey, you're getting a good deal.
Thank you.
So those are serious kind of allegations, and I don't want to leave that here. But Mr. Chen,
like I said, I can't substantiate, but
but you've been around the department long enough, and you've worked how many years?
15.
Do you have evidence of corruption?
No, I can't provide you with that.
So
that's
it
why
is.
I said it's just speculative.
Okay, so it is speculation.
I'm sorry?
I just want to confirm because it's a serious allegation.
No, I'm just relaying what I've heard from people.
What we're talking about is what people in town are talking about. That's all. Not any evidence, any allegations. There just seems to be
I'm not making that allegation.
Consensus of the business.
But again, then you're left with incompetence.
Okay. And because I don't want to leave this if it really is, and so now I'm hearing that it's speculation.
Yeah, I'm relaying third party,
Okay.
and third party is from in the department as well as outside.
Right.
But you've never seen evidence of enrichment by the leadership?
Talking about that.
I can't say the enrichment is a direct result of that, no. But I've seen benefits.
What benefits are you talking about?
Well, when I first started, the advice from one of your coworkers was don't drive a nice car because they're gonna think you're on the take. But I really there's nothing that I have that I can say that I would say I would never go to court or testify based on speculative hearsay.
Okay, the flip side of it, have you seen any lessees?
I'm sorry?
Have you, in your line of work of over 16 years with the department, have you seen any lessees?
I couldn't hear you.
Have you seen any lessees attempt to try to secure favors?
No, but I mean nothing illegal. I mean, there's attempts to amend statutes to be in favor of the lessees, but there's nothing illegal about that. I mean, that's and they've been successful at it. But that's out in the open. I mean, and if you have the political power to amend statutes to your benefit, I don't begrudge them, but I think it's incumbent upon the department to know when or not to support that kind of stuff and appropriately testify to the ledge.
Okay. Was there ever any instance where you felt that the department did not, in that situation, testify in a way that was watchful of their duties? I don't think allowing the appraisal provisions to be amended for rent reopenings is in the best interest of the state. I think lessees have sought to amend it so that when you go into a rent reopening, you determine your rent by appraisal, but you immediately need to turn over your appraisal to the lessee. Everything I've done before is that if the lessee disagrees with the proposal, they go get their own independent appraisal. That's part written into many of the leases. And if you can't come to an agreement on it after that, then you go into arbitration. But
as the lessor, you got your appraisal and you think the rent should go from 50 grand to 80 grand. And you tell the lessee, here's your new rent for the next 10 years. And they say, well, give me the appraisal. I'm thinking, why would we hand that over? You know, I know from the lessee's perspective, well, it saves me costs because if I agree with you, I won't go do it. But we're talking a business decision. You know, I mean, you know, people that are in this types of business that are commercial and industrial lessees, they should have an idea of what rents are. You know, all you need to do is look at land values in the immediate vicinity or even your tax assessed value and apply what is a standard rate of return for industrial lands, you know, 8% or so. So if you look at that and you kind of get in the ballpark, you should know. You don't have to, the state doesn't have to give up the appraisal. But the statute's amended, so now we have to do it. But prior to amending the statute, I think I gave you a memo from Russell Suji saying we're going to do it regardless of what the statute says. So, you know, that's kind of a little insight into it wasn't forced upon us. He was doing it before the statute was changed.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think it's really helpful to understand. And this speculation, we can test that speculation here in this committee through testimony. So I really do appreciate, you know, you making the distinction.
Well, I do want to go on the record. I have no evidence of corruption.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's because that's a serious allegation that we will follow up on.
I think we deserve better than incompetence.
Kobayashi, sorry, go ahead. Finish.
To close up, thank you, Chair. So, having just heard this dialogue regarding the dangers of speculating that there is any intentional wrongdoing or corruption, and this comes in the same meeting as what I've heard all morning, just with direct implications that the auditor is systemically corrupt in what they've been doing. So I would say,
Mr. Kobayashi, Representative Kobayashi, please direct a question to Mr. Chan. This is the testimony of Mr. Chan at this point. And if you don't have a question, we'll move on to Representative Yamashita.
Well, no, okay, my question is that if you heard what was said this morning relative to implications that there is corruption in the auditor's office, would you consider that to be consistent with admonishment about your implication that there's potentially some corruption in DLNR? To phrase it as a question.
Mr. Chan, please, if you want to respond to that, you can, but Mr. Kobayashi, that is an improper question to be asking. I don't see the relevance of Mr. Chan's comment. He's been brought here to testify about the SLDF audit and not the procedures of this committee. So, Mr. Chan, you've heard the question. Would you like to answer the question?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chan. Next.
Maybe that's my incompetence.
Mr. Yamashita, next question. Mr. Yamashita. Okay. Mr. Hashem, you're up next.
You mentioned this requesting discounting. Have you seen any direct manipulation of the audits? Because that's another one, not an audit, sorry, but the appraisals. Because that's another way that they could intentionally bring down the rate, right?
Oh yeah. I think I wouldn't say manipulation, you know, but I do think that in certain cases, the appraisal assignment or the scope of work is incorrect. So you end up appraising the wrong real property interest, you know. And so even though it's done by an appraisal, the number you're getting is, you know, for example, and this is not, you know, if you have fee simple leasehold land and you ask for an appraisal of fee simple value, you're talking to apples and oranges. So, you know, in a certain case where it's a ground lease, but like in the KIA extensions, if we were gonna if we were 2 months away from the lease ending and we get the building back, and we want to relet it or even extend it, I think that building would be ours in 2 months. So I think it would be appropriate for, if we're gonna extend it, that the new appraisal take into account the ground and the building, not just ground lease. You know, because what we're essentially saying is, I got this building, it's gonna be mine, and according to the tax assessed value, it's worth $800,000. But in 2 months, it's gonna be my building, and I'm saying, no, I don't want it, and I'm gonna let you to continue to use it for free for 10 more years. I'm not opposed to extensions if they're appropriate, but we should be compensating for what we're giving up.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt because I want to get through. You said a new appraisal should take into account the ground lease and
the improvements.
And the improvements.
So in other words, you know, I'm gonna give you 10 more years on the property, but you get to use the building now that really is mine. So you should pay for the building. Now, I understand the maintenance and deferred maintenance and issues and stuff like that, that you know, blah, blah, blah. But then you asked to, for example, if you want to extend the lease and now they're taking the building, you can transfer the maintenance obligations in the building to the lessee. That's normally not standard in a lease, right? Because the landlord takes care of the structure. But if we don't want to do it, we pass it on to them, we put it in the lease, but you still appraise land and building, albeit, you know, reflecting the lower level of responsibility we're undertaking. You know, does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
You know, so I mean, you know, again, I'm not, again, a proper analysis of lease extensions is prudent, but I'm not opposed to extensions, but we should be compensated. The trust should be compensated. Like, here's an example. You have 3 months left on your lease and you want to sell your building. You want to sell your business. How much do you think you can get for your business knowing you only have a right to be on the property 3 months more? You know, any buyer is only going to pay you a little bit. But today, the landlord approves a 15-year extension. So tomorrow you try to sell that business and all of a sudden your value went up, right? Through no effort of your own. It's only through the effort of the landlord granting that extension, but your business is now that much high, worth that much more. Shouldn't we be entitled to participate in that? Yeah, because they didn't do anything to increase the value. We did. You know, I have my family has a property, a rental property, and the tenant asked, coincidentally, 2 months ago for an extension, and my property manager goes, well, how much should we charge in an extension? I mean, you know, it's kind of like second nature. You know, after kind of doing this, I kind of feel like this is almost like writing a syllabus for real estate 101, you know, because some of it is so basic. Yeah.
Okay, any further follow-up?
So last year during the session, we came up with one of the hotels that we took back in Hilo, and we had not the landlord, but anyways, the real estate division came out and said we need to fund $1.5 million in demolition cost, right? I think that was correct. So that brought up an issue on maintenance. Usually the landlord will come in and do a property assessment. When you have a triple net lease, you come in, you hire a company, and then they'll come back and require the tenant to make the improvements to keep it up to whatever shape, right? Can you touch upon that? I'm assuming they're not doing it. That's why we ended up with a $1.5 million tail at the end, right? That the state was stuck with.
You know, I really don't, I'm not too familiar with that, but you know, initially, if the tenant builds the building, it's their building. It's not like we're releasing them the building and, you know, we impose obligations, but usually there's some kind of general clause that requires them to keep it in good shape, et cetera, et cetera. And then the onus would fall on DLNR to go and inspect it and make sure they're complying with the lease terms. You know, I shared a few examples with some members about how the land division has done their property inspections, and you know, it's very lacking. You know, so if it's lacking in ground lease inspections, I don't think they have the expertise to go and inspect buildings, you know. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it properly.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Hashem. Representative Perruso.
I just have a case study or an example, and I'd like your.
Am I taking a test?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's for my edification.
Okay.
So let's say we have a lessee, agricultural land, and they built a large fancy building, but their lease is expired. Actually, they're running out on their lease. They're going to end their lease, but they would like to sell their building back to the state. Do you think it would be wise for the state to purchase that building from the lessee that's leaving?
But are you saying the lease is going to end?
Correct.
Doesn't
they are terminating the lease.
Now, usually within the lease terms, when the lease ends, the improvements revert to the lessor.
Correct.
So we wouldn't have to buy it.
Correct.
So it would automatically come to us. I think it's incumbent on us to inspect it, evaluate, and say, do we even want it, or should we have them demolish it? Right? Because sometimes it's okay. Not useful.
So you're saying that the state purchasing that building would be unwise?
I don't think we have to. If the lease terms requires
it. We
it.
don't have to, but we would willingly be doing that.
Why would we be buying?
Yeah, so I'm just taking that answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ichiyama.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chan, in the SLDF audit, there was a pull-out article on pages 14 and 15 about the SEBA lease.
Okay.
And some of the questions that were raised were about early rent redetermination. Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. And so I believe that this is during the time that you were at DLNR.
Okay.
And I was wondering if maybe you can give us some context around the request by SEBA tenants to have the rent determined early and then setting the base rent pretty far out in advance.
I wasn't involved with it, you know, and at that point, Russell was not consulting me on those issues. But as a general premise, rent redeterminations, you know, in leases will happen down the line, right, in the future, and you'll have a mechanism to increase the rent to reflect market rent, because nobody can predict it back, you know, in the onset. And that's when you do the appraisal, et cetera, et cetera. The rent reopening is the lessor's friend, right? Because we can't predict it. And it allows us to stay on top of what market is. And it's usually the lessor's friend, even to the extent if for more especially larger landowners that have the bargaining power, which the state should, is they'll say, we'll do it by appraisal, but it won't be lower than the existing rent. So even if the market tanks, we're still there. So you want to stay on top of it every 10 years. For us to go and do it, you know, do a reopening that's supposed to happen in 2030, to do it now, why would we? That doesn't help, you know, I mean, why? Let alone 2040, you know.
In the audit, it mentions that the department asked for the tenants to come up with a rationale for this reopening, and it was financial considerations. They wanted to get financing. Are you familiar with any of those discussions?
I've heard, I dealt with the same issue years prior when they came in with the same thing. We need, you know, we need a longer known rent period because I need to finance improvements. And again, those are one of the kind of comments that it sounds good on its face, but you really need to dig into it. So, you know, I think we met with the executive director. This was prior to this last one, but it's the same premise. And I said, okay, fine. How many of your tenants, I think they got 70 or so. How many of your tenants need financing for improvements, and what kind of improvements? Because, you know, if you're telling me all 70 need to replace all of their roofs and stuff like that and blah, 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 and, you know, repave their driveways and something, that may be something you consider. But it comes back that there's only 6 of them and one of them wants to buy a new tractor. You know, and I'm saying you don't need 15, you know, you don't need a 10-year term for that. The bank is not going to give you a 10-year loan for a tractor. You know, so again, it depends on in the context of it. You don't just go do it for everybody because they came in and said we need it. You got to ask the right questions, you know, and if it warrants it, then we look at a way of how to do it. But, you know, like I said, there was only, you know, less than 10, say, someone moves some money in, you need a new tractor. You don't need 10 years to fix, for that. There's no lender going to give you that kind of loan.
So were you involved in the 2013 rent redetermination discussion?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
No.
So this incident you're talking about is prior to that?
Yeah, when they came in with a similar request.
I see. Okay. And then you did a vetting. You're saying you did a vetting of what they needed the financing for?
I think you needed to ask the questions, right? Because otherwise, it sounds good on its face. Our guys need this, so, but it just wasn't justified.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Members, you've covered a lot of ground. It's close to 11:30. I don't have any more questions at this point. Again, lots of ground was covered. Chair Tarnas, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Just one more question. I was curious, in your experience, I know you expressed disagreement with them, the land division, giving discounts on leases. Are there factors that would merit a discount on leases?
I think, okay, so this goes back to the basic premise of a long-range asset management plan, and having a proper inventory of all your lands. And I'm sorry, I'm going to divert, but it's very relevant.
Okay.
I've heard
if the chair allows.
Yeah, please.
But
Yes, but then I do want you to come back to that question of the factors to merit discounts.
Oh, no, it's all relevant to the question. Having a relevant inventory is important, but I've heard the comment that we operate in compliance with law, and I sent you one example where the board is supposed to classify all of its lands based on what the statute says, and it has ag, first class, second class, third class, blah 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 blah. I heard the testimony before saying, yeah, we do it when we lease the land, we classify it. I go, only 30% of the land's leased. You need to classify it beforehand so you know what your portfolio is. Now, within that portfolio, if you designate certain lands for income production, which I believe they have done, then in those cases, you most certainly should be making fair market rent. If you classify lands for, let's say, ag, I think you have competing state policies, like promote agriculture. Or you classify certain lands for high tech. The state has a policy to promote high tech. As long as they're not income producing lands, I could see going to the landlord and say, hey, we should knock off 25% because it's in furtherance of the state policy. But if you've created a true portfolio and you have income producing assets, you shouldn't be discounting those.
The audit brought up one particular one. I was curious if you had any opinion on the food basket, which is the local food bank in Hilo.
Yes, I think it goes back to the question: is that an income producing asset? If it is, then that's part of the division's responsibility in determining which land should be income producing. So if it falls within that one, you have a tough time meriting discounted just because it's a nonprofit.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I want to follow up on that just because I want to put a point on it. So the question was factors to merit disclosures. And for you, the primary factor or criteria is whether or not a property is an income producing asset. Should determine that question.
Well, yeah, I think but that's a long range planning thing that, you create portfolios of it. I think the large landowners all do this. Kamehameha or KSBE does not use each piece of land it has for a school, even though that's their mission. So they designate certain portions of their portfolio for income to support all of the other things. So in your long range asset management plan, that's where you should be looking at these things. But again, absent a comprehensive inventory, how do you know? You're just guessing.
Okay, but again, and it's the designation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. On this one question, yes, go.
So, but don't you think that the long range asset management plan should be not specific to a department, but should encompass all of the departments within which there might be even income generating lands?
Well,
Because otherwise you're gonna have a hodgepodge.
true, but and I don't know how the other departments work, but I know some of them are primarily funded with appropriations. You know, but land division is funded by the special land fund. Boating has its own fund too. So kind of hard to cross and then, you know.
And just in terms of planning, like looking at the portfolio.
I think that's considering what we've got.
Okay,
It's a little beyond the scope of trying to consolidate it.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So Rep Okimoto, any questions? We got Rep Yamashita, Rep Hashem, last question. Rep Perruso, any more questions? And Vice Chair Ichiyama.
One more just follow-up point is that, you know, for divisions like boating, their primary thing is ocean recreation. They just happen to have certain lands, yeah. But you talk to the guys there, they go, we're not real estate people. You know, we're here to do boating, but because we have the harbors and stuff that calls in. A lot of the other ones, they don't really have much income properties, the forestry folks, you know. So it's kind of hard to just, but that's why you do set asides.
Department of Ag does, EDC does, so that's why.
You're quite, so to clarify Rep Perruso's question, it's not just within DLNR, you're talking about a statewide.
Yeah, it's hard because with the formation of, I guess there was the act that transferred a lot of ag lands from, you know.
All right, members, we've gone for quite a bit of time. Thank you, Mr. Chun. Did you want to make any closing remarks? 2 or 3 minutes? Or 2 minutes?
Yeah, you know, and then again, I don't have any skin in the game here, so there's no motivation for me to make up things. I'm not trying to save a job or anything like that. You know, my wish is that the department improve its operations. And, you know, I think you kind of feel sometimes that I'm going after the administrators, and it's not a personal thing. It's just that after you look at repeated behavior and how this thing has been operated and they fail, and then only when the article comes out, then, you know, I don't think you're going to see any significant improvement unless you change leadership. They're not going to get smarter, you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chun. Again, as you heard, our schedule is going to go into December. As a witness, you will continue to receive emails of the people who are going to be coming before the committee. You may or may not want to stay engaged. It's completely up to you, but as a courtesy, I will be sending you reminders. And then you will also have an opportunity to review our draft findings and recommendations, as that's part of our rules. And then we will also send you remember, 1 to 2 hours before each hearing, you will also have a Zoom link sent to your email. Again, I understand you're retired and that you may not want to stay engaged in all of this, but we will keep you apprised of the proceedings.
But you know, like I said, and it doesn't have to be me, but I think it's important that the committee, as they take testimony from others, really vet it, because I've seen whoever gets the last word can say, you know, the sky is checkered, and nobody's here to say it's not. Yeah.
I can tell you that this committee is testing and vetting everything that we're seeing.
You're probably better at it. You probably did much better in law school than I did. No. But I think you know, it's just crossing that and the credibility of the witness. So,
thank you, members. Thank you for this hard week of work, and that we are still going to be continued as we have to come back here at 1:30. All right, members, we are adjourned.